What is up YouTube, this is Tcg Sam here, and in today's video I'm going to teach you guys how to beat the upcoming Power of the Elements meta, talking about cards that you may have heard of before, but also others that I haven't seen anyone talk about, and I think there's so many cards that can be used to beat this meta, so it's going to be a really informative video. Hopefully you guys enjoy it. If you do, let me know by leaving a like, commenting, and subscribing. But with that being said, let's just hop straight into it. So of course, I need to talk about what new meta decks are going to be coming out post Power of the Elements. I'm only going to be considering decks that are new from Power of the Elements because we're most likely going to get a ban list sometime right after or before Power of the Elements comes out, in my opinion. So who knows what the ban list will do to current decks. So I'm only going to be talking about specific cards to beat these new and upcoming decks. So of course the biggest one probably Splight. So Splight Frog, Splight Live Twin, different variants of Splight. Tearelements, so like Branded and Ishizu in a few months, Exosisters, and of course Mathmech, pure Exorsister Kotaku variants. So a lot of new meta strategies coming out in this set. Alright, so first of all, I'm going to be talking about some common cards that you probably have seen or heard before to beat Splight. Of course, there's a good reason why these are talked about. They're really good. Deck Devastation Virus, essentially, if you contribute a Dark Monster 2000 more attack, it's going to allow you to just destroy all your opponent's monsters with less than 1500 attack in their hand or that they draw. And most, if not all, of the monsters in the Splight deck, hand traps included, are just going to have less than 1500 attack. So they're just going to end up losing out to this Deck Devastation Virus. There's nothing they can do to it. I put Codebreaker Virus Swordsman in the corner here. It's because it's a generic Link 2 Dark Monster with 2300 attack, meaning that any deck that can make a Link 2 with 2 effect monsters can play Deck Devastation Virus in the side deck. So it's something to watch out for. Even if a deck doesn't normally have Dark Monsters, a generic Link 2 Dark Monster that's a target for Deck Devastation makes it so this is actually a really big threat if you're playing Splight, or if you're playing a deck that doesn't have Dark Monsters. This is definitely something to consider if your deck can support it. Dark Velour No More, of course, very good going second into the swipe board. Not much really to talk about here. It's just an incredibly good card. Your opponent can't respond to it with their monster interruptions. So essentially, you should only be dealing with hand traps at that point afterwards. Going first, you have cards like Solemn Judgment, Solemn Warning. The reason these are played is because stopping Splight's first initial summon is really good, because all of their Splight monsters essentially extend off of having other level 2s on the field. So if you're able to prevent the level 2s from hitting the board in the first place, so stopping the normal summon of Nimble Beaver, or stopping something like Splight Starter, you should just be good. Speaking of Splight Starter, essentially the deck, aside from its normal summon, has Splight Starter to play past interruptions. So to stop the summon, stop the normal summon, stop Splight Starter, and you should just be good. There should be no way for them to play after that. But how about some cards that you probably have not seen or heard about that can be used against Splight? First card I'm going to be talking about is And the Ban Played On. Essentially what it does, it says neither player can special summon monsters with the same level as those they control, and neither player can special summon monsters with the same rank as those they control. So what this means is your opponent's never going to be able to get 2 level 2s on the board very easily. So if they start with Nimble Beaver, activate the effect, Chain of Ban Played On, they won't be able to summon out the other Nimble Beaver, they won't be able to extend from their hand. There's not much they can really do about it from there. One downside of this card, though, you can sort of play around it with a card like Splight Starter, just because it's a quick play spell. So, for example, if the first thing they do is activate Splight Starter, summon one from the deck, technically they can normal summon a level 2 and then still make a rank 2. And then kind of do stuff from there. Of course, it's definitely going to hinder them because it prevents them from ever getting past that initial rank 2. So it's still a very powerful card, but just be aware that your opponent technically has an out to it with the Splight Starter, so it's not necessarily an auto win. Another card, however, that may as well be sort of an auto win if you can stick it on the board is Stygian Dirge. What Stygian Dirge does, it reduces the level of all monsters your opponent controls by 1. So essentially, your opponent can't ever make the rank 2s. Your opponent won't ever be able to make their Link 2s, because their Link 2s always require a level 2 or a Link 2 monster. So Stygian Dirge can be very good for that. A big downside of Stygian Dirge is technically, since you aren't really stopping them from summoning anything, your opponent can make a card like Nightmare Phoenix and attempt to out it. So if you're playing a card like Stygian Dirge, you probably want to have some sort of form of interaction to stop like the Nightmare Phoenix. But if this card resolves, your opponent really doesn't have much out. They're pretty much stuck playing like generic Link's Turbo at that point, which obviously isn't going to cut it. Finally, another level modulation card, Mischief of the Gnomes. This card is really shockingly good because one, if you're able to reduce everything in their hand by 2, it means that they're never going to be able to get 2 level 2s on the board, most likely, to successfly, because everything in their hand's level 2, and even if they have Splight Starter, that's only going to get one level 2 on the board. So Mischief of the Gnomes can be very powerful, but the other reason why I'm mentioning this card is because of its graveyard effect. It does the same thing as if you activated it on the field, meaning if you have a card like Beatrice, if you can summon Beatrice in your deck, you can summon Curious in your deck, you're able to dump this to the graveyard and have a consistent way to beat Splight. So Mischief of the Gnomes can be very, very good. It also has sort of an upper hand against Stygian Dirge in some cases, just because you're able to make it so you don't lose to back row removal and you don't lose to a card like Nightmare Phoenix. So these are definitely some spicy cards you can consider against Splight. Of course, none of them are perfect auto wins by any means, but if you have space in your side deck that you want to dedicate specifically to Splight, these are definitely some cards that you can consider. If you guys have any like other spicy techs to beat Splight, definitely leave them in the comment section below. Alright, the next deck I'm going to be talking about is Tearelements. So these are some cards you probably heard of before. Cards like Abyss Dweller, just being able to shut off their graveyard entirely can make it so that there's nothing your opponent can do. After all their Tearelements effects activating the graveyard to fuse, and that's essentially shutting them off of fusions for that turn. A card like Soul Drain is also sort of the same idea. It's just a floodgate version of Abyss Dweller in that sense, because you're able to make it so no graveyard effects can activate. And that's actually really important once the Ishizu cards come out, because Diviner the Herald's able to send Elder Entity Entis in some cases to out like some floodgates, but a card like Soul Drain prevents that from happening in the first place. So a card like Soul Drain can be very, very strong against Tearelements. They just really can't do anything. They really can't do anything when this is on the board unless they have an out to it. Finally, DD Crow. While it's not as high impact as these others, it is a hand trap that you can play in most decks, if not all decks. And this, you can DD Crow the fusion monster, the fusion material monster that's activating. So one of the small Tearelements will activate in the graveyard. It specifically requires you to put itself back from the graveyard back into the bottom of the deck. And if you DD Crow it, it's just not going to resolve the fusion. While it doesn't completely shut out your opponent like these two cards do, having it in hand trap form means even going second against Tearelements means you're able to have a way to shut them down. Now some spicy cards to beat Tearelements. The first card I'm going to be talking about is Silent Graveyard. It's a very simple card. It's just discard 1 card as cost. Effects that activate in the graveyard this turn are negated. So why am I even talking about a card like this when we have something like Soul Drain? Well, Silent Graveyard being a quick play spell is actually really huge. What this means is it is both going first and a going second card. So obviously going first, you're able to set it and it sort of acts as a Soul Drain for that one turn. But going second, if you're playing into a Tearelements board, a lot of the time their interaction is going to come on your turn where they're trying to fusion summon. And if you Silent Graveyard them, then they're just not going to be able to do anything. It's very hard for them to counter this because it's not like a floodgate they can just destroy or something. Of course, the downsides, 1, you do have to discard a card, and 2, it does negate your graveyard effects. So if your deck has graveyard effects, this can be a double-edged sword. But it's definitely something to consider, especially because of its versatility, like I mentioned, both going first and going second. Another interesting card, Zombie World. So Zombie World is actually shockingly decent now that the more you think about it against Tearelements, because their main fusion monsters all require Aqua monsters. So they're Kikalos, their big monster that requires Rhino Heart, and the 2 Aqua monsters. They're not going to be able to summon it under Zombie World. Yes, they can still summon other fusion monsters, but at that point you've cut them off of a very important part of their engine. And the reason why I feel like Zombie World is just somewhat better than some of these other cards that I could have mentioned is because you have access to it in a card like Necrorole Banshee. This means that you'll have access to at least a decent floodgate against the Tearelements deck if you have access to Necrorole Banshee. So for example, something like Branded Fusion can dump into the graveyard, or if you're playing like some sort of Punk variant and playing Chaos Ruler, you're able to dump Necrorole Banshee to the graveyard pretty easily. And what that means is your opponent's just never really going to get their engine started. They're going to have to rely a lot on RNG to be able to fill up their graveyard and attempt to summon monsters. The monsters they're going to be summoning are probably like El Shaddai Winda, possibly Dragostapelia, but at that point, it's not really that threatening because those monsters aren't that great without the backing of the Tearelements engine itself. But why not just cut off the whole engine to begin with? A card like Mass Change 2 in any dark deck means you're able to summon Master Hero Darklaw. Master Hero Darklaw is absolutely insane against that deck. Your opponent essentially has to have an out to the Darklaw that isn't even like Forbidden Droplets, because you can't Droplets under Darklaw, which is kind of nutty. You're just essentially able to completely shut out your opponent if they're not able to out this card. Your opponent won't ever be able to get their engine started, and your opponent has to hard draw it out because a card like Diviner the Herald doesn't even work. It won't be able to out Darklaw. Your opponent needs like Dark Ruler no more, or like Forbidden Chalice or something. So definitely something to keep in mind. I also want to mention this is a very good card in the Tearelements mirror because of course you are playing Dark Monsters. This is going to allow you to put up a one-sided Macrocosmos, meaning you can play, but your opponent can't play. And that's going to be enough to win you games a lot of the times. So yeah, essentially Silent Graveyard Mass Change 2, just denying the graveyard is kind of the big it's kind of like the big general idea behind beating Tearelements. Denying the graveyard or making it so that their fusion plays are much less effective with Zombie World or DD Crow. Alright, so I'm going to be briefly talking about how to beat Exosisters and Mathmech, since these probably won't be as popular as Splight or Tearelement, so I'm only going to be covering 3 cards for each of them. I guess Exosister, the first card you probably heard of, Chaos Hunter. The reason why you would play this is because their 2 main XYZs that act as disruption do just banish your cards. So essentially, if your opponent is gonna special summon one of those disruption monsters, you're able to summon Chaos Hunter and your opponent's not gonna be able to disrupt you with them. Of course, they have other XYZ monsters they can go into that have disruption effects, but Chaos Hunter shuts off a decent part of their disruption engine, and that can be really good. Next up, Kaijus. So going second into Exorcisters, if they end on the big rank 8, a Kaiju gives you so much value. Not only is the rank 8 a banished one on your turn, but it also transforms into another XYZ that can be another disruption. So a single Kaiju essentially gets rid of 2 of your opponent's interruptions, and unless they had a really, really good hand, most of the time that's actually going to be enough for you to break their board. And the band played on. It's also another thing against Exorsister. Of course, this is a going first card, and sort of like Splight, it isn't perfect because your opponent technically has an out to it because they can transform their 1 level 4 monster into a rank 4 monster, and this card doesn't stop that. But this prevents your opponent from spamming out 2 level 4s on the board to make those XYZs in the first place, and it also prevents your opponent from making 2 rank 4s to go into that big level 8 XYZ. So, and the band played on can be a decent side deck to have impact both against Splight and Exosister. So if you're running low on side deck space, this is definitely a card you should consider that can beat both of these matchups pretty well. Finally, last but not least, I'm going to be talking about how to beat Mathmech and like Mathmech variants. So there can be only one is incredibly powerful against these decks. The whole deck is Cybers, and that just means they lose very hard to a card like there can be only one. Your opponent's not really going to be able to do much under this card. They can't even go like Summon, Link, because all their links are usually Snipers anyways. So they're honestly just kind of screwed if you flip this card up. It can be an auto win on its own. Zombie World, on the other hand, while it isn't necessarily an auto win, it does turn off the link part of their extra deck. Since the links usually only require Cybers monsters and they're only going to be playing Cybers links in their extra deck, this makes it so your opponent's kind of locked into those Mathmech XYZs only. So that's why I would say it's not perfect, because your opponent can still technically play with the XYZs, it just lowers their ceiling a lot. But once again, I'm mentioning Zombie World because it is probably the most accessible out of these options. You don't have to hard draw it like there can be only one or hand trap. You're actually able to have so many ways to quote unquote search it, which is why I'm always talking about a card like Zombie World. Once again, this isn't perfect. It doesn't completely shut out your opponent, but its accessibility makes it so it's definitely something you want to consider playing because this also covers a variety of matchups like Fluwanderees as well. Finally, Ghostbell Haunted Mansion. If you remember Tri Brigades and their trap card, Tri Brigade Revolt, the Mathmech trap card is essentially the same thing, but I would argue is better. So being able to stop their trap card means you take out pretty much their main form of disruption. If you're able to take that out, then you have a lot less to deal with, because that single trap card essentially rips a card from your hand, sends a monster from your field to the grave, sends a smaller trap from your field to the grave, and adds an Omni Negate because they're going to use Diameter as material. So essentially, one Ghost Spell is going to trade with like 4 possible ways you get interrupted. So Ghost Spell can have a very, very high impact in that matchup. Of course, it's not really going to stop too many of your opponent's other plays. It's kind of exclusively almost for Super Factorial. So it's definitely something to keep in mind. Just because it's a hand trap, it means you're able to slot it into your main deck because it can be a decent going second card against other matchups as well. So that's going to do it for this video, guys. Hopefully you guys learned something new, and now you have a better idea of some of the cards you can use to actually beat these matchups. Hope you guys enjoyed it. If you guys did enjoy the video, do let me know by leaving a like, commenting, and subscribing. Comment down some other tech cards that I might not have mentioned in the comment section below. It'll definitely help everyone out. But with that being said, I just want to thank you guys so much for watching, and I will see you guys in the next one. Take care.